Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Milliken, and we are here at the Poison Pen Bookstore, another one of our virtual events. And tonight we have Carolyn and Charles, the two authors who write together as Charles Todd. They're going to be discussing their brand new novella, Hanging at Dawn. Just got copies in. And if you're watching on Facebook and you want to send in some questions, I'll be largely silent and kind of off to the side here, but I'll pop back up towards the end of the show and with any questions you might have. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Peters.
Thank you, Patrick. What a pleasure it is to have a little Christmas visit with Carolyn and Charles. We're all in different places. I'm at home in Scottsdale. Carolyn's at home in Delaware somewhere, right? And Charles is at a hotel in Key West. So, you know, the magic of Zoom brings us all together. But where we're really going to go tonight is that we are going to go to British India. We are going to go to India under the Raj, and we are going to learn about what was life like for Bess Crawford when she was maybe 5 years old, when her father was the head of the regiment on the Northwest frontier, or at least near the Khyber Pass, and Simon, whom we know is in her life in her Bess Crawford mysteries, starting in World War II and moving on. We don't know enough about Simon. So this is our chance to find out, right?
Absolutely.
We decided that this would be far more fun to do than trying to put all of this into one of the Bess books. And now you know secrets that Bess doesn't know. And they will be, the dots will be connected in the next couple of books.
So you've written 11 books for Bess, full-length novels. And the first one, I think I remember right, is called, we've done these all together, so, but my memory for titles goes hazy. It was called Duty to the Dead, is that right?
Yes.
Duty to the Dead.
And you've basically done one a year up until this year, but with the pandemic, as I understand it, the 12th Bess has been put off until next summer. So
Yes.
Is that the reason you wrote this novella, Charles? Did you decide this would be a great chance to explore Simon's early life?
Oh, absolutely.
First of all, there were some problems. The actual printing and dissemination of the books made it a little difficult because of the time frame of when the book actually would have gone to the printers and been produced and quarantining and all those kinds of things. And so fortunately, An Irish Hostage, you're correct, will be out July 6th. So we had a little gap there, and we started talking about what we could do. And we thought about maybe just doing a short story style mystery with Bess, just to kind of fill in the time between books or something on that kind of scale. And the more we thought about it, we said, you know, Simon is a very important part of the Bess mysteries. And yet, in many ways, he's the one that everyone knows the least about. And with that little seed germinating in our brain, we started working with this story told in a rather unique way. I'll let Caroline explain that.
Well, we really didn't want to just write a story about Simon. We wanted to see him through the eyes of the four people who knew him best. Melinda, Richard, Larissa, Richard's wife and Bess's mother, and Bess herself. And so each person sees a side of Simon, but not everybody sees the whole of Simon. We won't until 2 books from now. But some of this is echoed in the book next summer, where we take Bess to Ireland for a wedding. So it's very timely. You don't have to be a Bess fan, though, to read the story. It stands by itself. But if you are a Bess fan, it's their way of knowing exactly what's happening when Bess herself doesn't.
Carolyn, we're getting some feedback. Can you sit a little bit closer to your microphone?
Yeah,
I
I
think,
have problems with the with Comcast. Is that better?
yeah, that is better. It was a little bit garbled before. So basically what you're saying is that Simon was less well-known, and in order to tell his story, it would be interesting to see him through the eyes of other people.
The people who knew him best.
Right, and particularly the Crawford family. But we really, you keep alluding to it, but we really don't know that much about Bess's father's role in the Great Game. I mean, I think of this as the Great Game, which apparently we're still thinking about being in, or maybe exiting here. So much later. I mean, Afghanistan has defeated empire after empire. Here we are. And so I think about, I mean, the worst movie ever made of a book, I think, was The Fire Pavilions. I mean, it is such a wretched movie, but the book, The Fire Pavilions, is wonderful. And there's a chunk of it at the end that I think should have been a second book myself, that goes off into Afghanistan and, talks about all this. It's a wonderful primer for.
I love The Fire Pavilions. And also the second one that came, took those characters to Afghanistan.
Right. So anyway, it was the Northwest frontier. You're roughly
Right.
at the Khyber Pass, is that right? And that's
Yes.
where
Yes.
and what rank is Bess's father as head of the regiment at this time? We're in what, the 1880s, 1890s? Where are we?
When we first meet him, he's a major, but he's just been promoted to his majority. And then by the end of the book, he is the colonel of the regiment. We follow him as well as Bess growing up from 5 to about 12 or 13.
So she was 5, and when we're done with the story, she's about 13. But Simon, if I remember
Yeah.
right, is what is he, Charles? He's like 17 and a raw recruit.
Well, yeah, actually, because of his size and strength, he managed to join the army and had done extremely well in his training, when all of a sudden they find out that he's not technically old enough to join the military. And that's how Melinda comes into the story. It explains how Simon sort of came into the Crawford realm, so to speak, and how Simon, as a result, wound up being sent to India under the watchful eye of Richard, Bess's father.
Well, he was apparently too good to kick out of the army, even though he was underage, so they needed to season him, but they also didn't really want anyone to know how young he was.
Right.
So, it's almost like those women who were sent
That's
out to
right.
India to catch husbands or something, except that he's sent out there to kind of grow up in the army. It was wonderful how the British used India as a
He has problems in his background, which you will discover in the book, that make him, if they send him home, he would only run away and enlist again. And they decided that
Come forward a little bit, Carolyn. We're still getting an echo.
when he, because if he is sent home, he will just run away and enlist again. So they decide that Richard might be able to do something with him. I can't tell you all of it, but when you read the story, you'll see why all of this takes place.
Well, I thought it was a wonderful idea. So what, Bess is what, like 5 years old when he gets there? I was trying to calculate. I've never been entirely sure what the age difference was between them in the book.
8 or 9 years.
So if she was 5 and he was 17, he's 12 years older, roughly, than Bess.
No, he's not 17 when it starts. That's the key to it. Aha.
Uh-huh.
The main thing is
Basically, 10-year difference.
About a 10-year difference?
it's about 8 or 9 years difference. He's actually quite young when she first meets him, but his voice has changed. He's tall and he's filled out. physically, so he could pass for 17 or 18, but he's not.
Oh, okay, I see. What was the actual legal age to enlist in the Army at that time? Was it 18 or was it 21?
He was 18, but sometimes they took people at 17 and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
I always
It's,
had the impression reading the books that he was old, he was, that was a bigger age gap between them. So,
Well, that's what everybody thinks.
yeah, I think you shrunk it. as we moved along. Why not?
Nobody knows how old he is until they find out later in the book.
I
So
like-
everybody thinks he must be 17 or 18, and really, well, I might as well confess, he's 14, and he got away with it.
Okay, wonderful. So Charles, I know that you have always loved research and going to England and, you know, being on the ground, so to speak, to write the Rutledges and some degree the Besses, but this is a book where I'm guessing, but I might be wrong, you haven't actually been to the Khyber Pass, or am I wrong and you have been?
No, my interest in the Khyber Pass started with the Flashman series, actually.
Okay,
But there is a tremendous amount of history, but no, Caroline has been to India, but I have never been to India. So it was a bit of a challenge for me, except for the fact that in my life experience, I had a boss who was from what's called Mumbai now, and several other close friends that were Indian. And through their eyes and through their experiences learning, I think that the most difficult part is, and you see it in the book, it's the human interaction part, which you know from both the Bess and the Rutledge series is what truly fascinates us the most. To understand the ranking, the social hierarchy, the caste system, and how the culture that's within India, especially in that time period, really shapes how the story develops. It makes it, in my opinion, more believable than if you just basically left all that cultural aspect out. Then really and truly the whole mystery would lose its character.
it's
He
interesting.
doesn't tell you that I sent home 70 rolls of film that he had to sit through.
Well, you know, you can't go back to India at that era. You can go and visit India and see the physical India, but you can't go
That's
back.
right.
But one of the things I thought was interesting, because I mean, I've read a lot of fiction set in India, although I've never been there. God knows I've read a ton of British fiction, is that you had two caste systems. You had two very structured societies. You had the British and you had the Indian. And in
Yes.
this particular case, you have both. So, you know, you've got the British Army society, the rules for wives, the rules for children, the social interactions, the whole bit. But then you've got what's going on in India where they are. And it too has its own layers and rules and so forth.
Oh, yes.
And so that's really where the conflict arises. So this book is called A Hanging at Dawn. Why is it called that, Carolyn?
Oh, well, we can't tell you that. That's the whole point of the story. You'll have to read it.
Well, it's clear somebody may hang. All right. I mean, otherwise, why would you call it that? But still.
Most hangings at that time were done at dawn.
Yeah, so many times, this is one of the reasons why we call it Bess, 12 or Rutledge 22 or whatever. So much of the time, we don't actually put a title on a book until we finished it. And our hope is that by the time you come to the end of the book, then you'll know exactly why it has that title.
I'm sure I'm sure you're right. That must drive the marketing department insane when you don't
Oh, it
tell.
does. And quite a few times the title comes from something that is said in the book, and we have to explain that.
Well, because this is short, because this is a novella, it's not a short story, but it's not a full-length book. You can't have as much in the way of side plots or other things going on. You do have to really drive it more
Yes.
focusly towards, the resolution of the plot. So was that different for you? Did you enjoy doing that?
It's fun to do. I think the biggest problem is that as we got more and more into the story, we really wanted to expand it to a novel. And Emily kept saying, short story. And we kept saying, "Well,"
Yes, I could feel it was wanting to grow on
but
you.
I think the length, the nice thing is that the novella length gave us an opportunity to explore quite a few things that we wanted to say.
And
We couldn't get it as a short story.
it was helpful in two ways. One, I understand what you're saying about getting to the point and dealing with the compressed amount of space. But remember, we've written and published over 20 short stories. And so we're very used to the short story / novella format in terms of things like Maharani's Pearls, which also features Bess. This one came in, the text part of the story is 143 pages, but the thing that I found so fascinating was the way we broke it up.
Yes.
How in the beginning, the first part of the novella is told by Melinda Crawford.
Right.
And then the second part of the story comes in with a completely different point of view and from a completely different character in that of Richard. And then it goes on to Bess's mother, and it keeps the train of the story going, but it is told from 4 distinct points of view as the first person telling that section of the story.
And that
That was
meant
a lot of fun.
we had to learn more about Richard. We had to learn more about Clarissa, not just as Bess's mother, but as a real character in the series. Richard, of course, has been in a few more books than Clarissa. And then we had to tie it up with Bess as a young child who couldn't be told much of what was going on. And that's why she will find out in the next couple of books what happened in India, but she won't know what her parents and Melinda know. And that's the fun part, because Bess will have to discover it in an entirely different way.
I think it's an interesting idea, when you've written this many books in a series, instead of just leaping forward every time, to go backwards and then backwards moving you forward again in a different way. I always think that people who write long series at some point ought to go back and explore their characters' early lives. I mean, you've done it with Rutledge.
Yes.
Because there's things that you don't know when you start out with these characters. You just had an arbitrary moment in time where you decided to start a series. And, as they grow and you put things in, I think it feeds a curiosity about how did they get that way, or what are these events we referred to, what really happened. I always like that.
The thing for us is it's interesting to us too.
Yeah.
I remember when we wrote A Fine Summer's Day in honor of the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I. We took Rutledge back to 1914 when Hamish was still alive, when he had just proposed to his fiancée. And it's amazing all the little pieces that you realize you don't know about this character you've been writing about for all these years. I mean,
Right.
if I remember correctly, we've been writing the Rutledge series for 15 years. You would think we knew everything there was to know about this character, but we didn't.
That was the interesting thing, because we thought this is going to be very, very easy to write. We just go back and talk about Rutledge in the past and give him a mystery. He's an entirely different man then. And you understand what he was before the war and how the war changed him. This was in many ways a very, very interesting way to do it.
That's an interesting way to do it. I'm very fond of Charles Finch and his Charles Lennox mysteries, and he's actually written a prequel trilogy. He started out with one, and then he expanded it to 3 books. And it's interesting to read it because you know so much about Lennox in the present, and how and where he is. But it's interesting to go back and see him before it all started with that knowledge, so that when he meets the woman he eventually marries, and she's married to somebody else way back in the past, and you know how it's going to go, it's still fascinating, you know, to see it. So I thought a prequel trilogy was a really interesting idea. So what you're saying is that you've put things into this book that you can then explore moving on with Bess. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's another really fascinating way to go about it. I can't imagine how much fun it must be to learn more about these people, because, you know, you've created them, but they take on lives, and, you know, how did they turn out to be the way they are?
And it's been interesting reading the reactions on social media to A Hanging at Dawn. We knew that Simon was a rather popular character, but I don't think we really appreciated how much the fans really liked Simon, and the feedback. You know, you get a certain amount of idea when you read reviews, but getting the fans' comments on things like Facebook and the like, it's really interesting, because you see a dynamic about the stories we write that we don't necessarily see.
But isn't Simon been designed to be kind of a guardian? You know, he's a bit of a white knight for Bess, but he's there when she's really in trouble or needs something, and here comes Simon. And I think readers always bond with that, you know, that kind of figure. But what's interesting here is to find out why that bond formed, and also how that makes Bess's character, when you get to the First World War, how her character is shaped by what happens, or what happened in India when Simon was there.
Yeah,
But you know, the most
with Richard and Bess's mother telling specific sections, you also get some idea of not only the influence they had raising Bess, but the kind of people they were and how their minds worked.
Yes.
And see how it's reflected in the person that Bess is in the later books.
You bet. Well, she's always talked about the honor of the regiment, and we get a pretty blazing look at what that actually means in A Hanging at Dawn, in a way that we might not have thought of. I'm sorry, Carolyn, is there something you wanted to say?
One of the interesting things in writing this, we wanted to make sure that fans of the series found a great deal in there that they could translate later on as the books go back to this point in time. But we also wanted to write it in a way that anybody who picks up the book, whether they read the Best series or not, will find it an exciting story. So we were walking this tightrope between telling fans what we wanted them to know and making a standalone short story novella at the same time so that everybody could enjoy it. And that was, you learn a lot doing something like that. It was very interesting to see what we could put in and what we couldn't put in for the people who had no idea who Bess and Simon were. It was a rousing short story.
I was just going to say, you certainly want to hope that, you know, Hanging Garden will pick up new fans. I mean, Hanging at Dawn, sorry, will pick up new fans. People who may never have read Bess will see this. And, you know, short reads at the holidays are appealing anyway, because people maybe don't have as much time to focus. And so you may bring new readers to Bess, you know, from this as a result. And I haven't checked, but I think all of them are still in print. One of the problems I face with a really long running series is that sometimes publishers don't keep, you know, the early entries to the series in print. They move to digital or print on demand. But as far as I know, all of the Besses and all of the Rutledges are available, which is great, you know, from my standpoint, because then I can turn people on to them.
Yeah, they're all in paperback, and also almost all of them, I think, Charles, are in audio.
Yes, they are.
And lots of people, one thing we have found out doing these virtual events, because Rob, my husband, turns them into podcasts, is how many people are not going to sit and watch us on the screen, but they're really happy to listen to this conversation in a podcast, which, you know, I'll have for you tomorrow. And I think that this is the same with audiobooks. And one reason we like to do events this way without tickets is so that people who like audiobooks or who read digital books can still enjoy talking to you. You know, forcing them to buy a print book in order to do this eliminates that. So I feel quite strongly that we should make these open access so that all of your readers in any format can, you know, listen to the conversation.
Yeah, it's nice to think that here we sit, the three of us talking, and there may be hundreds of people out there we have never met. Some we know quite well, maybe. Some we will meet in the future. Some we'll never know. And they're out there ready to see us in ways that a traveling could never have done.
It's fascinating. You know, we get, I hadn't appreciated just how global our audience was until we started doing this full time. But I mean, we get questions and we can tell that people are literally all over the world tuning in. And they're never going to buy a book from us, right? They're just not, you know, somebody in Mumbai or Pune, India or something. It's not going to order a book from the Poison Pen. But that doesn't mean they're not going to buy one of your books in some form somewhere, which I think is great.
We've gotten very interesting emails from people in India who read the books.
I'll bet.
We had a situation where we were talking with somebody on Twitter and then later exchanged some emails and things. It was a lady who's a retired nurse living in Vancouver, Canada. Well, it just so happened that we went to Left Coast Crime, which was being held in Vancouver. And we wrote to her and said, we're coming up. We'd love to, you know, go somewhere and have a cup of coffee. And she said, oh, well, the hotel you're staying in right across the street has this special chapel for all the men who died in World War I and their campaign flags. And I'll meet you at such and such a time. And she was such a delight to talk to. I would have never known that this little chapel was it's on the backside of a church, but there's a little chapel to the World War I soldiers, and sure enough, they had campaign flags from the Battle of the Somme and this, and that, and the other, and it just had a wonderful time. And neither of us had any clue that we would wind up meeting a very lovely person who was a retired nurse and liked the Bess Crawford series.
And we had a character.
Sorry, Carol.
We had a character who was American, but who lived in Michigan and decided to join the Canadian Army. And he was quite an interesting character in the Best series. So it was nice to actually see the real battle flag.
I can imagine that it was. So speaking of Rutledge, which we haven't done for maybe 5 minutes.
Regiment had
Occasionally she freezes up. You're freezing up a little bit.
Yeah, it's,
yeah, I don't know what, I'm going to have to talk to Comcast. They're not doing very well by me, but let's talk about Rutledge.
all right. Let's go back and talk about Rutledge. As I said, we haven't mentioned him for a little while. So the new Rutledge, you and I and Charles will be having this conversation, a similar conversation, on February 13th at 4:00 Mountain Time, which I'm really excited about. And I have a printout of the Rutledge, which I'm really looking forward to reading him. But why don't you give us a little preview of what we could expect in the new Rutledge?
Well, we had a trip to Northern Wales. I had been there before. Charles had never been there. So we had an opportunity to do quite a few things. And every once in a while, something would happen. And we would think, oh my goodness, this would be great in a book. Rather, for example, we visited a quarry. There's a quarry in the book. We went to a strand along the water. That's in the book. The wonderful narrowboats that we had a chance to ride in, crossing the aqueduct that's like a couple hundred feet above the river, and no railings. You're just in a little trough of water with a little sidewalk beside it, and you go right across this chasm above the river.
If you look at the cover of the book, you'll see that aqueduct going high above a deep valley with the stream at the bottom of it. And we actually were on board one of the longboats going across that aqueduct.
Are you in Chester? Is that where you are, near Chester? I didn't hear what Carolyn
We
said.
spent some time in Chester.
Sorry?
The aqueduct was in Wales.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is Deborah Crombie set one of her books on, and also this, I'm pretty sure it's the same aqueduct. There can't be that many of them. And the narrowboats came into play. I can't remember which of Deborah Crombie's books it was.
I remember that one. It was a very good one.
Yeah.
She didn't go across the aqueduct, but she took them into some of the rivers and canals down in Cheshire, and very interesting.
It was. So I didn't quite hear where this Rutledge is. Is
Well,
it in Wales?
the book starts out in Northern Wales.
Okay.
And then carries on into the Cotswolds.
Most Shropshire.
In Shropshire, those areas, but in the Cotswolds area of England.
So when you're in Northern Wales, where are you? Near Llangollen or the
We went to Bennysacoed, and then we went to we went to Bedgallert, and then over to the
castle up there.
and then all of a sudden I can't think of the name of the bay we went to, but we were traveling all through this area, and really is an interesting part of Northern Wales. And then part of the story takes place in Shropshire. So we had a chance to use an area around the Longmen and right in the eastern part of Shropshire.
Wow.
It was really interesting to put all this together and make a story. But the most interesting part to us was that we have a character in the very beginning whose identity is unknown. And then as Rutledge explores this person's life, a whole different story opens up. And you don't realize when you started out what you're going to find in exploring it. And I just love doing that because you never know what the characters are going to do, what they're going to tell you. But
It-
the basic problem was a lie that is told that gets people killed.
It was an interesting trip because we went to Harriet for the festival there, and then dropped down and spent several days in Avon, and then started working our way west towards the Cotswolds and on into Shropshire and all of that. Then we went into northern Wales and ended up in Chester, which was a fantastic place to go.
I just
It
love
really
Chester.
is. I've
Uh,
spent a lot of time in Shropshire. Was a major Ellis Peters fan, and I visit her. She lived in Shropshire and that whole western Berkshire country.
We did Cadville's church,
Sorry?
the cathedral there in Shrewsbury, where
Right.
castle where Cadfell, where I'd been there before, but it was Charles's first trip to
Yeah.
see.
I like
But-
Shrewsbury a lot. I wish that more of it had survived. It's disheartening to stand where the Abbey was and you're right in front of whatever it is, the railroad crossing or something. But
It's
but I think I think that whole Marcher country is beautiful. And I've spent a fair amount of time in northern Wales. I remember sitting on the walls around Conwy Castle after I had gone through it.
yes.
And I was sitting there kicking my heels and looking at the castle next to an interesting man who started a conversation. It turned out, I've always loved this, turned out that he is the town mason. And his job is to keep the walls of the town of Conwy and the castle, to keep them intact because, the weather's constantly attacking the stone. In fact, if you are interested, there's a fascinating, I'm trying to remember what it's on. Dana and Rob and I watched it the other night. It's like a year progress report on rebuilding Notre Dame in Paris. And as part of that, they have had to identify what all of the limestone was, where it came from, which it turns out is under Paris in different layers. But, they had to look for fossils to identify the hardness of the stone that is the pillars as versus the porous stone that is the vaults because it's lighter, which unfortunately then absorbed all the water from the firemen and became very heavy. And so another catastrophe. And, and they related it to York Minster. They went over to get some experience from York Minster because they had a horrendous fire, if you remember, in the rose window, I think.
Yeah.
York Minster was shattered. So luckily, Notre Dame didn't lose its glass, which I found fascinating. But anyway,
I can't believe that that fire didn't take the glass. It was just tremendous to watch.
or if not the water. But anyway, my point is that, I realized then in talking to the Mason like 40 years ago, how much work it is to keep the fabric of buildings, of monuments, of castles, of cathedrals and all, how much work it is to keep them up because the weather's against them, pollution's now against them, everything's now against them. And so it's a constant struggle to.
Please
That's
send
why
us-
they have to charge.
Please send us the information on that Notre Dame 1 year progress
Yeah.
report.
I will, I'll have to find it. We stumbled on it watching TV and I
would
don't,
love to see that.
I will. I think it was a YouTube thing. Let me check in with Patrick. Patrick, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the audience? If you want to pop back in behind, you're like the Great Oz. He disappears behind the screens and he returns. I love it.
Yeah, sure. Hold on a second here.
There he is.
All right, okay. Let me see if I can. There's one person that's viewing that's asked a bunch of questions back to back. Let me see here. Okay, this is a good one. Betsy is her name, and she asks, is there a character that you would really like to kill but they keep resisting?
That is a great question.
Oh, in this book or in any book?
I suspect in any book.
There's a character in The Irish Hostage, which comes out next July. We could very happily kill. This person was a pleasure to write because this person was so terrible that we had to keep her from getting out of hand. Maybe she would be the one that we would kill off.
How about you, Charles? Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I always think back to Bowles, and we created Bowles to be somebody that you'd like to at least jerk a knot in, and for that reason, he served an excellent purpose. But somehow I wanted to send him off to some some obscure location where he could contract something like dysentery.
No, we gave him a heart attack, remember?
Yes, we did. That was.
I would think she was really asking about a repeating character, but maybe not, because I mean, in every book, there has to be some evildoer that you end up
There
getting.
have been a couple.
Right.
And Wings of Fire, for example, there's one that we would like to have killed, but he served his purpose.
I agree. Another question from Betsy or anybody else?
Let's see. How about a Simon spin-off series is a question we have.
That's the funny thing. When we wrote The Walnut Tree, a lot of people since then have asked us about whether or not we were going to continue that character on and start a whole new series. And the biggest problem is we produce a Rutledge and a Bess every year. And between that and a couple of short stories that we do, our greatest concern is quality. And we did The Walnut Tree, a Rutledge, and a Bess all in 1 year, one time. And that took a great deal because we were so concerned about making sure that we put our full effort into making each one of those books the best they possibly could be. But I don't know, Caroline, do you want to take that one?
We spent that whole year, I don't remember much of that year. We were either writing or copy editing or looking at the galleys of 3 separate books. And then you go to a convention and somebody says, do you remember on page 37, the second paragraph, what did you mean by that? I
Right.
don't know.
I think the bottom line is to do
It was amazing.
Yeah, to do it, you'd really have to sacrifice one of the series books. You'd have to take a year off from Rutledge or Bess to write something else, and that's hard to do.
Novellas we're getting a hang for, and so we might have more novellas coming up. Who knows?
Okay.
It's funny because our fans, we get so much feedback from fans who will read our books in like a day or 2 and immediately want to know when the next one's coming out. And I think if we were to tell them that, well, we decided to skip this year so we could concentrate on we would have a pretty strong uprising on our hands.
Probably so.
We have been asked if we would like to do a series featuring Melinda Crawford, who is in basically both the Rutledge and the Bess Crawford series. But maybe she'll get a novella. Who knows?
I do have another question here, which is Rutledge ever going to come to am I interrupting somebody?
No, you're fine.
Okay, all right. Is Rutledge ever going to come to terms with what he suffered in the war and get some measure of happiness? Is that even possible? For him?
Happiness is something he may find, but the people we have known who had PTSD carry it with them to the grave. The question is, how is he going to handle it in the long run? One of these days, when we have plenty of time, we're going to write a short story about Rutledge's great-grandson. And maybe when
I didn't understand you, Carolyn, about Rutledge's what?
great-grandson. Great-grandson.
Oh, sorry, I've got it now. All right.
Who was in the Afghan theater and comes back with his own problems. We've toyed with this idea for some time now, and even though you may not know how or where or when Rutledge finds some measure of peace, you will know that it happened.
Well, I think there's a real difference between a measure of peace and happiness. And a measure of peace may be the best that he can. I guess what you're really asking is Hamish going to be part of his life forever? And I've noticed that Hamish is receding slightly as we're moving forward in time. I mean, you may bring him back with a vengeance in one of these books, but isn't there a little less of Hamish recently?
Well, Hamish appears when there is something to do with the war, because that's the context in which Rutledge knew him best. And so depending on what the main story is in each book, Hamish's role will change accordingly. But that doesn't mean he's any less a factor in Rutledge's life. The question is, will Rutledge find someone like Kate or someone else who will eventually understand and be able to make her own peace with Hamish? So stay tuned. It can happen.
Yeah, it's a tough call because in many ways we like having Hamish around. But I think the most important thing to remember is, even though we're up to book 24 now, it's only been, well, Test of Wells was in 1919 and we're only in 1921. So it may seem like, hey, Rutledge has been having this ongoing problem for a great deal of time, because next year will be our 25th anniversary of the publishing of Test of Wills. But in Rutledge time, that's a very short period of time to try to overcome the trauma that he went through.
Yes. I mean, one of the things, we've talked to people who have had problems with PTSD. As a child, I remember seeing a man in our town who suffered shell shock in World War I. And every once in a while, we would see him on the streets. And I know it stayed with me for a long time. We've talked to psychologists and psychiatrists, and they say that basically the men who try hardest to cope do the best. So we're taking Rutledge through the coping to help him find his way through this.
That's a good point, though, about how he goes from one case to another. I mean, each book is a case, but the case can start the day the last case ended. In fact, it usually does. So you're right. It definitely keeps the time down. Patrick, anything else?
Nope. Not
All
seeing
right.
anything else.
Wonderful. Well, this has been a real pleasure to connect with both of you. Can I wish you both a very Merry Christmas? And even if you're going to be spending it at your computer, Carolyn, try to have a little fun, a little wassail, a little whatever. Right.
And thank you, Patrick, and give Rob a hug for us.
I certainly will. And
Well,
Charles,
yeah.
Again.
are you
One thing
spending
I
the
do want-
holidays in Key West?
No, we're heading back home to Palm Beach area tomorrow. One thing I did want to mention, today we went live with a brand new Charles Todd webpage.
You did.
It hadn't been redesigned since 2007, and we completely took it all down, redid all the programming, all the graphics, all that. I say we, Caroline and I had a lot of input into it, but we had some very talented people behind the scenes making all that stuff work. And there's also a sign up page for a newsletter that we're going to be sending out, not every week, but we don't want to fill up everybody's inbox with everything else that they've got coming in. But we're very excited. It's got a nice, very clean, very interactive look. And
Yes.
we've had the Charles Todd map updated, so it now includes a lot more of the titles and a lot more of the locations, even things like a fatal lie and a hanging at dawn and all that are on the interactive maps now. So
If you haven't been there for a while, go visit it.
Well, I certainly will. I think that sounds wonderful. I should end by saying it's not too early to sign up for an autographed copy of the Rutledge for February 13th from the Poison Pen. We are really excited about carrying them, as we have all the way through. You know,
absolutely.
we've been together
Oh,
a
yeah.
long time, book after book after book. It's been a lovely relationship. So much fun. Thank you both again, Patrick.
Thanks,
Thank you for hosting it.
Thank you very much, Patrick. You were a
Bet.
wizard behind the scenes.
He always is,
Yeah.
for sure. All
And
right.
to everybody who is watching, let us say happy holidays to you, however you want to celebrate them.
Indeed. Happy holidays to all of you who are watching, and a very happy new year. Certainly this time, I think we all want to say a happy new year with a lot more force than we may have said it in the past.
Absolutely.
Yep, for sure. All right. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.